got into a fun banter in the middle of these moments and showed up a little late. So, welcome to Beard Banter, episode 47. My voice isn't 100% here, but I actually echoed the Matt in the room, and we now have Matt cubed here to solve that challenge and add to this conversation. So, welcome to episode 47, Working-ish Groups, and we're going to talk about our experiences in working groups. And maybe in a few minutes we'll get Matt Topper to define like his mind what is a working group. But Matt Lang, what's going on? You said you had a question to kick us off,
Well,
brother.
no, I was going to start off just by asking, is it Matt or Matthew to
Oh,
the group? Because I
let's
figure
do
we all
that.
get,
Let's
you
do
know.
it. Okay. I'm definitely Matt, but I can go as like Matt 2 if I need to or something. Topper, what do you want to be?
Boom, you said it. I don't have a first name. Topper's one of those last
Okay.
names that you just get known by
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, we've
Hmm.
we've worked together enough that just literally happened. I didn't even think about it, Topper. I just call you Topper. I don't even call you Matt. So if I'm
Right?
saying Matt, it's probably you, Matt. So if anybody's
All
getting
right,
confused in the audience, we've now sorted it out.
I'll just go by
Uh,
Lang then. That's fine.
okay,
Yeah, there
fair.
you go. Right. You guys didn't have to do that. Like in school, there were so many Matts, it just immediately happened anyway.
I never had that issue, but
Oh,
yeah.
I had like 5 in some of my classes. It was ridiculous.
So let's go around and talk about this. What is a working group, Matt Lang, in your experience? And we'll go to you, Topper.
Yeah, so a working group is an informal operation inside of typically a more formal organization that has a goal of producing an output. I think we can talk more about that later.
Sure.
But to that note, right? It's not a committee. It is not like a committee would be something more formal,
Sure.
where
And
there's
longer
meeting
standing
minutes and
potentially.
longer
Yeah.
standing and members are in there. So working group something kind of like peels off of those, from in my experience, that allows you to go produce a single work output.
Yeah. That's a great way to say it. Topper, what about you?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the word informal, Matt. It's not necessarily like a long-standing committee. It's not necessarily this huge thing that has a lot of process around it. It's a group of individuals really trying to accomplish a specific task, a specific work product, utility content, right? Any of those types of output type words, that's the ultimate goal. Um, but what it's not is like a big thing with a lot of, you're following Robert's rules and doing all this formal policy and stuff, right? It's just working
No,
together
no,
to make
yeah.
something.
You know
No
what's
point of order.
interesting? That's one of the good and the bad things about it, right? Like, first I want to kind of add some color to what you guys both said, which is really informal. It's usually for some purpose. There's a gap or a need or something missing or something that would give benefit. And so, or there's knowledge or expertise to share or right, or some combination of both of those. And it's to make some output, some product that hopefully gets used and consumed and benefits others' lives or makes changes in something, right? And so I think that's the point that of what I would say is defined is it's an informal gathering of people with some expertise, knowledge, or input that allows them to come together with some output. The challenge with these working groups, and I'll start with a challenge, at least in my opinion, first, is that there is no regulatory guidance. You usually have some or regulation or governance or control or a way you have to do this. It's usually just kind of people trying to figure it out and come up with what they want to come up with. And it's usually the moderator or the person that owns the output of the work product specifically that then kind of has to kind of herd cats. And Matt, you were talking about this before, Lang, about you have all this positive of all this knowledge, but you also have the egos and the different efforts. Or that was you, Topper, saying that. Maybe you can continue and elaborate on that before we get into all the positives that come from this. But
Well, I think there's negative in a way that's similar to any other group of strong-willed,
yeah,
intelligent people, right? Everyone is a big believer in their own ideas, and not in any kind of malicious way, like to the
sure,
detriment of others, but they're confident in their ideas. And when you bring together a lot of individuals like that, it's no different than in a business setting, right? If you bring together a lot of department heads or
right,
or CEOs or whatever position it might be, everyone is fighting for their thing, and because they think that they're right and that's the best way to solve their issue. And that can that can make the meetings difficult, especially in the early stages where you're trying to decide what that output even is, right? In many cases, that's not even defined. It's only there's
Right.
only some ethereal goal that we want to do something that accomplishes this. What that something is, that's up to the group to define in many cases.
Yeah,
Yep.
Lang, go
No,
ahead. You were
I
about to
think
say.
I think there's a key difference there too, right? Like I love working groups for many reasons. One of them is you get to practice kind of
Yeah, sure.
in this more informal environment with peers.
Or flex
Uh,
your ideas, right? To your point,
yeah,
like you get to kind
exactly.
of test something out and
Yeah.
go, "Hey,
Yeah,
I
it's
got
true.
something a little avant-garde. What do y'all experts think?"
Yeah, and
Huh?
you just kind of
Yeah, yeah.
you get to kind of share your experience and tweak it, adjust it, and
Sure.
learn, right? But again, I think you know, and again, I don't want to focus on the negative, but this is also a
Just for the
volunteer thing
beginning. We're gonna
typically.
go mostly
Yeah,
positive
yeah, I
after
know.
this.
No,
I'm forcing y'all in the bowels of it
it's a
first. I
volunteer
apologize.
thing. So again, that's the yin and the yang of a
Yeah,
lot of this, right? Is because it's volunteer, so you get passion. It's volunteer, so you can get attrition. You can
sure.
get
Yeah.
you can get kind of competition in ways that doesn't benefit the group or the output. So
Yeah.
it can definitely go. It needs a strong guidance and strong control to succeed, which luckily I've always seen. But you can see them kind of. It can easily get off in a bad direction.
You
Um,
said something in there, right? You can get attrition, which can be good and bad, right? Like sometimes I've
yeah.
seen working groups that I've been involved in for years where one person leaves and the whole nature of it changes, and not necessarily for the negative. Like somebody that was underrepresented gets to speak. And, I'd make that like
Yeah.
when Matt Lee left and Matt Topper just started getting all the win time back because Matt Lee shut up finally,
I
right?
wasn't
Like,
going to bring that up, but now that
but
you mention
you're not
it.
wrong. It's not wrong. But you think about the other aspect of this is like that change and that delta has to be managed. And at some point you have to say this isn't working or you have to move forward. And then the other side of it is what about the ones that are part of it and don't produce or are there but aren't actually doing the things they've said they've done time and again, and you have a volunteer that you feel like you can't necessarily force to go get this work done that they volunteered to do, but they've maybe stolen it from somebody else to actually do that work. And I've been both guilty of it as well as a victim of it in my own time and involvement in various different working groups. And so I'm not pointing this finger outwardly only, I'm pointing it inwardly too. But I think that's the other side challenge of this. It's not their necessarily their day job where, if I'm in a Tiger team working inside of PAX 8 and we're working on solving some solution, that's literally my primary focus, right? And so you compare that to these working groups that I'm involved in for SME work or things like that. That may not be my primary focus at all times, and so I have to balance both sides of that. Like you said, it's kind of the yin and yang of that point.
Yeah, you're often
Yeah.
stretching people beyond their kind of normal, which is great, right?
Yeah,
You're it's kind of this wonderful kind of coaching opportunity to help people grow their portfolio and understand more things. But absolutely, yeah, you can definitely get into a situation where it's not, something that you want to take a day is now taking, months to kind of get
yeah.
to completion.
Yeah.
But I agree.
And you mentioned it though, the ability of these groups to lose members over time is a positive too, right? If you're a member and realize, hey, I've dropped out of things when I realized I didn't have the time commitment to
Yeah,
do it.
I wish I did it more
So
sometimes,
on
I
that
think.
note,
I
Mr.
lament.
Lee,
Yeah, buddy.
when you go and look to champion these groups,
Yeah.
what do you have any kind of like off the cuff statistics on where it ends up, right? Do you kind of start with 20 people and end up with 70% of it? Do you end up with 50%? How does that go for you?
So I haven't led any real working groups. I've always been a participant, and maybe we're
Okay.
doing a little Johnny foreshadowing here into this, moving into maybe my first foray in this. But I've you do see an attrition, I think, at the very onset, and I think you should. I think a lot of people think they want to be involved in something or potentially are involved in something for the wrong why, right? Potentially they're not. I think you also have some attrition just through self-selection. I think, for me, for example, I'm involved in a working group where I'm probably the least experienced member in the group. I am probably the least breadth of understanding of the subject matter knowledge body, at least by my own consideration. And I'm still brought in for my view on SMB and how it applies to SMB and how it applies to direct MSP. And so I think the attrition is natural if you don't find a way to speak towards needing that expertise and that you're still valuable in that way for that purpose and that piece. So for me, I've been kept in a group just because someone talked me into staying, even though I really am the lowest person on the totem pole. But I do believe you're going to have a lot of people that find they get into a group and don't feel like they're capable and leave as a result of their own limitation or self-limitation, right? I guess I would make it akin to the Peter principle. At some point, people grow to the level of their own incompetence, right? Self-included. I suppose maybe I'm bastardizing that principle, but I don't know.
I was gonna ask more about it because I haven't heard of it before. But
Yeah, search Peter principle and tell me how wrong I am on that
all right, fair enough.
understanding of it. But
So
yeah,
isn't that the idea that you get promoted until you reach a job that you're no longer capable of?
yeah, pretty much. And I feel like when you get invited to be one of those SMEs in some of these committees, I've found myself to be overwhelmed personally, myself. And I find like I have a pretty broad knowledge and I'm pretty confident in most things that I do. And so I can only imagine, depending on the working group, you'd have a certain amount of attrition due to just that, right? Just due to imposter syndrome, or potentially maybe it's not that space. I recently just got to comment on some stuff for FAR, and a couple of questions there. I literally just had to say, "Ain't me." Sorry, I don't have any knowledge of international impact on control timelines and reporting timelines for companies that operate internationally from those governances. Not my knowledge set, unfortunately, right? And anyways, but yeah, Matt, that's a great summation of it.
The imposter syndrome, though, is a real thing when you start getting into these kind of groups, because you're used to in your own circles being one of the more knowledgeable people in a given area, right? And all of a sudden you're in a group with everyone is an expert in this, including you. So you're not used to talking with peers. You're used to talking with people who don't understand it at all.
Right. Yeah. And it forces you to be better, right, in that regard too, or have some humility, or both, at least in that case. But what what's some of the good products that have come out of working groups? Can anybody kind of play around with some of that? Because I can think of one, like CIS, for example. It comes out of a group of humans going, let's figure out what we should write down here, at least in its earliest iterations.
CIS, the CSA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so someone just mentioned the Dunning-Kruger, and this was actually referenced in one of my committees that I operate in recently around this effect, right? So I think it's I was actually going to just go look this up and mention it.
Well, I think it was just debunked too. Just by the way,
really?
I believe like 5 or 6 months ago, you'd have to go double check me on this, but they said mathematically it doesn't accurately seem to be appropriate. I guess maybe it's been longer, but it's okay.
Though,
I'm still living with it, bro. It's right on there for me. Like, I'm still living it. I'm right here on Dunning-Kruger. Continue with this initial
bounce
iteration.
Between Dunning-Kruger and imposter syndrome, back and forth.
That's so good.
Pretty
sorry,
much.
Man. I didn't mean to derail you. Back to the point. It was still valuable.
No, I think that's what I was kind of saying, right? Is you get to this point where we're talking about there are negatives to the working group. Absolutely, right? That can cause some frustrations and operation, kind of like, do you have time for this? But sometimes once you get into it and you actually get to see people bring their A game, right? And everyone's bringing their A game, there can be some magnificent moments in there where you really, I know you and I, Matt Lee, have had like tons of these back and forths where we're just really challenging each other, at least from my perspective, to think about these concepts that we're looking to institutionalize or standardize on, right? We are challenging each other, just like, does this make sense? I'm challenged here too, like how to think about.
And I think I genuinely want to know.
Worth their weight in, exactly.
Yeah, right. Like, it's not just a popularity contest, but sometimes you do have people that it is, and needing to win is part of the factor. And I think that's one of the things that is just tough to deal with in a working group, when you don't have people challenging each other for mutual challenge to ensure that we really are trying to see if this is valid before we make this and spout this, versus I'm trying to win. This is my concept and I need it to be right. And I think that's I don't know. I usually find those people pretty quickly and run away. At least
I think those people don't last too long in a composed group. The people who are genuinely trying to challenge and have their own ideas challenged for the idea's sake, as opposed to the person, tend to do well. The people who aren't don't seem to last as long. They get too many ideas challenged and too many issues and just drop out.
Yeah. I agree. That's probably the attrition. I won't say the name, but I've certainly been involved in one that's a 3-letter just for the last like 4 years, 3 years. And we definitely lost one of those personalities, and man, it changed the world.
Right,
And
because
so
you've got a whole bunch of people who are asking questions, not making
yes.
assertions,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
questions come more questions, and everyone gets to kind of go on this journey, learning together and refining out a thought process. Again, it can take time. It can be
Yes.
laborious. It can feel like you're going
Repetitive.
nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can feel like,
Yeah.
all right, where were we last month? Okay, here's the same
Well,
thing rehashed.
here's a
But
great
yes,
example, Matt, like, or Lang, here's a great example. You and I were talking about a simple question. What is an MSP's most valuable asset? When we're talking about traditional data security, you value assets in their risk, their regulatory risk, their value, the things they're worth, what it can be, all of those different methodologies for what the value of the asset is, right? Sensitivity, all this stuff. What's the most valuable, most sensitive asset an MSP holds? And I'll take away the word owns because words matter, but holds. And Topper, can you guess where we maybe went with this as to what we came up with after a lot of back and forth?
I mean, I'll tell you what I would say.
Let's do it.
I
That's
wonder
why you're here,
who
man.
matched.
I wonder who
Most
matched.
valuable asset MSP is access to their clients.
Amen. You got it exactly right. 100%. That's the exact term. It's access and context around their clients, systems, services, and their data. And it is congruent with equal the value of what those assets are, right? And it's the way this works. The access to that asset is equal to the value of that asset because I have full God mode access. I'm admin. I have full control. I have all those things. And so that's exactly it, Topper. You hit
yeah,
it on the head.
I think we ended up talking around this about how how do you value an MSP, right? Because
Yeah,
there's the billable that comes in, right? Absolutely, right? So you've got that in there. But what about the value of the company they're protecting, right? So
exactly.
that's a
Mm.
really difficult, we always talk about aligning your MRR with revenue, blah, 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 et cetera, right? But knowing there was this concept, and again, it's outside of the MSP industry, but assets under management, right? So what is the value of all the assets you have under your management? Everything's digitized nowadays. So
Yeah.
we have, the RMM tool, and now this has access to everything. That's a different equation, I think, than a lot of
Yeah. And
companies
it was
do.
coming in the lens of how we scope a particular kind of assessment for MSPs, right? And that was what the conversation was. Where do you put that scope? Well, we said
Yeah.
it was a limitless scope, but where is the scope? And we really wanted to set at the very minimum, what does it need to be? And in my mind, it is things that touch or have tangential access to the access to clients' informations, right? So that's the scope. Or, Matt, this is something, Topper, that you and I came to conclusion of many years ago, right? Because that was the way we defined it, was saying, no, we have to include everything that has access to those end clients, right? And we had to have all of our tools in the scope of our SOC 2. We had to have all of our tools in the scope of our processes and policies. So, yeah, anyways, tangential into the actual working group. I didn't mean to give you all a window into the world, but I guess I did.
Yeah, let's
No,
stop that conversation before we spend the rest of the hour talking about relative values of what's important in MSP world.
True. Anyways. All right, Lang, what you got? Let's move on. What's the next piece to talk about
I
working groups?
I think the where I was working, I think where I found the most success. Well, I would say success, right? But it's hard to define. Back to what you're saying was in and around producing white papers
Sure.
and kind of having a good output there to kind of share with the industry. And I thought that was. Be curious whether either of you have had those kinds of experiences and what they felt like on your end before I share where I went with it.
You first, Topper.
Me first. All right. No, not directly. Here's my first thought that comes to mind when you talk about writing a white paper or any kind of documented output. It's very difficult or tempting to try and get a completely objective, fact-based vision into these. Everything that you write, or at least everything that I write, I don't know if you guys have the same challenge, ends up being colored by my own experience and driving towards trying to use what I feel are the right solutions to it, right? You almost feel like you're setting up the reader to come to the conclusion that you want them to on your own. And so it's very difficult or challenging to try and take a purely matter of fact neutral tone. At least that's the problem I run into with everything like that. Like I feel like I'm trying to write an academic paper, right? Something that is completely objective and not colored by my
Mm.
own experience. And I have found that challenging. I don't know if you guys have, but at least that's my goal, right? If I'm writing something by the true definition of being informative and educational and not being one of those, to borrow my tired phrase, like marketing masquerading as education, um, that's I find that hard to do. I have to take a
Yeah.
different viewpoint.
No,
Well, and I
I
think
think
there's a
that's
hard
interesting. Yeah.
well, I think there's a hard separation. I think first, just real quick, because I love what you just talked about, Matt. But
Yes.
the difference between a white paper being one key output product that is supposed to your point, be this objective, educational understanding of what this working group just put together to share, versus working groups with less defined outputs, right? Like, for example, what we're working with you and I, Lang, and how that just has a kind of an ongoing nature and an always changing nature and a constant growth nature. And what I'm going to be talking about later that I'm starting is much more in that second form, right? Is that piece. But when it comes to a white paper, I've been involved in that same space. I actually think it works out better because you have direct reference material. Usually you have the ability to output the product on the same page. I do think it does exactly what you said, though, Topper, and it usually is for some reason, and that reason colors the existence of that white paper in a lot of cases and how it's even produced and who's doing it. And I think that makes that even more complex, Topper, when you start getting into these white papers. Oftentimes you're in something where it is still even objective as to how you choose to apply something to make more secure or to do something, right? So even when you're getting into it, there's still, in my opinion, objectivity in my own way that should color the outcome of that white paper of what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
because it is how I'm applying it. And so it's somewhat tied. So it's hard to separate those two between what's my opinion and what I'm driving. And do I want them to come to my same conclusion? Well, I want somebody to at least tell me this paper's crazy and I'm wrong, and now they told me I'm off, or want to validate my conclusions I came to, I suppose, in that white paper. But I think, just back to your question, Lang, being involved in white paper working groups usually for me produces a faster output that everybody agrees on, and it tends to, Matt, either directly color it because of how the origins of the group happened, or keep some of that color out because of the nature of a group of people arguing about this, right? Like, I've
Mhm.
talked people off of a ledge before of adding in their ideas because I looked at them as just their ideas and not directly related to the overall content we're talking about here, if that makes sense, right? We're, anyways, maybe too ephemeral, not tied to a certain subject matter to make that make sense to the
No, I
audience.
mean,
No,
right, there's some point where the idea is the group's idea, not the person who
Yeah.
opened the text editor.
Right. Right. Yeah. And now in modern constant text editing, in most working groups, I'll find columns of arguments happening that you have to just try to track with the main document to understand what's happening, right? Because people are going, well, I disagree with the use of the word mission here. And I think grand strategy should be restated as strategy and business overall outcomes. Well, I feel that, and so you have to kind of track that conversation playing
and
out.
that's why I kind of asked the question, right? Because I feel that there are these working groups that can go and create something that's going to be ever changing and shifting, right? Whereas, at least from what I've seen, right, and I'm here to share, but
My experience, yeah.
the white paper, at least there's the kind of like, okay, we need to get to X, right? It can take a little while to figure out what X is, but
Sure.
once you figure out kind of like what X is, at least there's like this path that can get defined and output can be created. At least that's where I come from, right? Like, I think when that output is, I mean, it's no different than running it to I think our earlier point, right? No different than running a project or running a think session inside of a company, right? Like, what are we going
Sure.
to create
Yeah.
out of this? Let's define that now so we can actually all aim in that good direction. But yeah, I think that's why I brought it up, because the white paper, at least it felt, how do you define a project, right? It has a defined end goal, it has a time
Yes.
frame, right? Those
Yeah.
kinds of things were structurally defined a little better. And again, when we talk about this informal working group, I've got some others that I operate within that are, I am working on formalizing in order to make sure that there is this defined output that where we are creating. And again, that causes some attrition, but I thought that was an interesting kind of way to scope it, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
let's
Well,
define the output in the beginning of a working-ish group.
is exactly my point. And I think one of the things you said very early on, Lang, was the benefit of actually being involved in that discourse and conversation, even in the ones that don't end up producing something. I've actually had really good conversations in working groups. Let's say you're making a new iteration to a test. You're still doing something, you're still creating something, you're going to have an output, but it might also happen the next time you iterate that test and the next one. You're working with the same group over and over again to do these same things. I think there's like a lot of value, and maybe it was you, Topper, about arguing it out, like, or genuinely having conversations and saying, am I wrong? All right, what do I need to learn about this? What do I need to change in my vision? And especially when you're trying to like matriculate a body of knowledge for, let's say, somebody taking a CISA plus or a CFR or something like that, where you're an industry participant, right, a practitioner trying to share your knowledge that is certainly, back to your point, Topper, colored by the things you experience in your life and the humanity that is us. But have either of you worked on things where you're like, I know you have, Lang, because I've worked on something iterative. We're on version 1.6, about to 1.7, and then hopefully 2.0 coming out here soon. But have you, Topper, been involved in anything in that long form iteration of something as a work product, and anything to think of what's good and what's bad about that?
I would talk about, to the start of your point, I've been involved in things that ultimately went nowhere at all,
Yeah.
right? That we had these long discussions and either we never really got started, or to your point, Matt Lang, we never really decided on what the target should be. But you know what? That was still valuable in and of itself, right? Having the discussions, having the debates between the people in it. Maybe you see them in another group later, maybe you work with them on something else, but that self-reflection that it causes, and that debate and challenge to your ideas is equally valuable. Maybe the output would have been more valuable, but from a
True.
self-learning perspective, right, you've
Yeah.
made some significant progress just from doing that, even if it ultimately fizzles out.
Well, and hopefully that is not Johnny foreshadowing by Mr. Topper for what I think is a perfect pivot time, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. And then we'll wrap it up and come back to Lang if you have any other final points first.
Well,
But,
I had a question that might lead
yeah.
you in to that.
Okay, let's do it.
Better, right? So, like, I think this is the challenge. How do you, in a working group, or like we've kind of been talking about, there are other, how do you create a place where people are enabled to share openly, to your point, Topper, around like having that open discussion to then formulate? Because I think that's not an easy thing to accomplish, right? We can say it should happen, but what any tips on, or kind of like, what do you think?
Topper, let me get my notepad out real quick, because I'm going to need this here in about 30 minutes. So I need your answer real clear here.
So you know what my answer is? Like, you just got to be okay with having your ideas challenged, and that's not an easy thing to do. My strategy is to go by example. I let my ideas get totally crushed, and hopefully the group sees that and sees, okay, he didn't get kicked out of the group because he had a stupid idea,
Right.
or his ego didn't get destroyed, at least on camera. Maybe later.
You cried a little bit later, but yeah.
But you just have to be, and honestly, like, the first time that happens to you sucks, right? You're just not used to it, especially if it's a subject area that you're used to being in the SME in the room on.
Yeah, 100%.
And you just got to work through that. And
so you're saying,
understand,
like,
it'll be tough the first time.
the stand-up comedian version of this, where you gotta flop a whole bunch of times, and then
Right.
you'll be okay with it.
No joke, right?
Yeah,
Like,
literally. All right.
Matt,
well,
you
this
saw
is
some of like the videos I used to do back when we were in Iconic. They were bad.
Oh, for sure. And they've increased and increased and increased and increased over time from just repetitive gluttony, I suppose. But I love it. Well, this is actually Johnny foreshadowing seriously for me, unfortunately, because I'm actually wanting to announce that I am starting a new working group. And I kind of want to use it as a lens for how working groups even form. Right. So I'll start with this journey that I've been going down. So we said this earlier, usually starts with a gap somewhere. The gap in this case is that nobody's ever mapped products and services very well down to the CIS framework, down to those 153 safeguards, right? Nobody's done that mapping to say, if I use your product, tool, or service, how does it help me meet 10.1 or 9.5 or 3.2 or 2.1 or 2.3? How does it help me meet those things so that when I'm starting to work down this as a practitioner, I actually have a map that helps me understand the codification and taxonomy of the tools I buy, Well, why? Because it was easier to sell it as XDR, stops all threats, magic whizzy banger number 7, whatever it may be, and as opposed to, data-based understanding of this. And so as practitioners, I believe there is a need for that, a gap for that, and people need to find an easy way to figure this out. And if vendors started thinking in that lens, they would build better products that help solve these things more holistically, right? This is kind of the challenge. There's not that mapping, and vendors haven't seen that. So about a year and a half ago, I started going down this path of trying to get vendors to help map themselves and their tools, products, and services to CIS. And the first time I did it, I thought like this optimistic young man that everybody was on board. And I sent out this request, and everybody sent back 16 answers out of 70. And those 16 answers were absolutely not meaningful in any way. They did not have any tie-in. They clearly didn't understand the assignment. I had clearly failed. And so fast forwarding, now we started getting people on board. People are doing it. We've got a lot of awesome vendors. I won't name them because I'm trying to stay vendor agnostic in this conversation. But a lot of vendors leaned into this process, and we're starting to do it. And guess what? We're meeting one-on-one, and I'm meeting with other SMEs, and me and a Matt Topper sit down and say, 1.1, does your tool do that? Well, I do have an agent, and so I don't really do that because 1.1 says have a list, and that list needs to actually have other data that's not going to be covered by that, but I could provide some information. Okay, cool. Let's come up with a term for that. Let's come up with it, right? And so we started getting these terms codified. And as that went forward, we were able to meet and get several of them mapped. I started noticing some incongruencies based on my own humanity of being talked into one thing from one vendor for a very specific reason, but not necessarily having that same ability to apply that in a little bit different context for vendor number 2, and started seeing data differencing in that work. And one of the things that I make it akin to is it's just not scalable with me being an SME having conversations to try to be that mapping. And in the same case, it's also not necessarily valuable in that iteration. It doesn't necessarily have value if it can't be trusted, and it doesn't have some real indexing codification that means something when I say it. And yes, this helps me meet this control in this lens, and here's the partiality and what else you still need to think about, right? That kind of gap in understanding as a real practitioner. And so where it evolved was me saying, you know what, instead of us trying to do this where we're just actually meeting and discussing it, let's come up with a series of questions that will codify yes or no. And a great example is a lot of vendors, when they talk about centralizing logs, they'll say, yes, we do that. We're centralizing logs. When in reality, they have some logs that are part of their platform, but they are not a log ingestion platform. They're not Graylog. They're not a SIEM. They're not doing those things in that way where they're made to do that. And so what I'd rather ask is questions like, is your platform set up to ingest logs from other disparate sources in normal formats, or some other easier question to ask that, which you can obviously guess where we're going is I'm not going to be writing these questions, hopefully. But to be able to find, are you a log
working
ingestion
group
source?
write those questions?
Yeah. And that's exactly it, Lang. That's where I'm going with this is I have put together some time frame throughout December. I'm not traveling, and I'm going to be working on a working group with people. I think Sunil Yu has agreed to come and join us. We've got several others to try to come down to what are those questions for 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all the way through the end of 18 that help me codify if someone's platform is part of incident response. Like if there's somebody like Exigence, for example, Exigence is a platform. I guess I wasn't going to go agnostic, but they donate to CompTIA, so I'm okay with it in this case. But if I'm a incident management or incident response platform, then I'm going to be part of having an incident response process, actually, right? I won't be something separate from that. And so how do we get that question asked that it only brings in the right pieces? And so I'm putting that group together, and I'm going to be sending out an invite for people on LinkedIn coming up in the next day or so to join a kickoff meeting Friday. And then also throughout the month of December, dedicate up to 8 hours. I'd really like to get at least 8 hours of time this month from whoever volunteers to help come up with questions for each set of safeguards and have it so we can do an automated process to walk people through this mapping and make this way more scalable and more repeatable and linear. So Matt, in true Topper fashion, kick the crap out of my idea. Tell me how to make it better. That's why I'm not announcing it till Friday. Or tell me if I need to cancel it. I'll have a lot of month of December back to me. So yeah, let's play that around. But that is how working groups get born, is those needs and this kind of, at least my call to action here. So I expect both of you to be in it first off, if you don't kick it too much anyway. My tease.
No, I think you're tapping into a couple things there, right? Which is find people with passion.
Yep.
Right. I think it's going to have passion behind it, or else it will not work. I think you'll find that you've obviously curated that around the globe. But then let them know how much time it takes. This
Yeah.
is one of the things I'm struggling with the working groups that I run, which is
Yeah.
making sure that people understand as they come and get involved, what does that time commit look like, and then kind of holding them accountable to it a little bit. So those are not easy things to do with people's volunteer time. Finding
Yep.
the good time for it is another one, right? Like in the middle
Yeah.
of the day is not good for a lot of folks,
Yep.
and so
Mhm.
you got a lot of these struggles. So you didn't share all of that, but those are things I challenge you back with. That I think you're gonna, you want to what we call like upfront contract before you engage folk.
I feel like you're reading my diary a little bit, and then we'll go to Topper's take on this. But over on my right, I actually have my Microsoft form that I'm putting up for people to fill out whenever they respond to my question. And the questions that are in there is number one, why do you want to be part of this working group?
Yep.
Number two, name and email address, sure. Number four, are you deeply familiar with CIS critical controls and safeguards? If the answer is no, that's not this working group. So I'm already trying to be selective in that first piece of getting it down to people that would answer deeply. And then are you a practitioner? Are you an auditor or assessor at some point? But then also, will you be able to attend more than 8 total combined hours in the month of December by participating in these sessions? Sessions will be come and go. Here are the times: Tuesday, December 12th, 9 to 11. And what I made them was like 9 to 11, 3 to 5, 11 to 1, 10 to 2, to try to get some Aussie time frames in there, as well as a little bit of UK time frames as well. So I definitely feel like I'm starting down that path. I definitely feel I'm not far enough along. I think, to your point, a contract of sorts. I now know what I'm adding to my list of, not a contract, but certainly a document I'm going to send you when you sign on that says, here's what I expect out of you. Here's what I think is most beneficial. Here's the goal. And, are you interested? If not, understand that I may ask you to leave, and it's not a negative. It's just, this is a so how do I deal with that? And I think having that
I ask for
conversation.
attestations, right? There's kind of like a kind of they, we I've heard podcasts around this, around like kind of like how you should sign a document, right?
Sure.
So talk about like why we have signatures of documents. It's because when you do that, you create a
Some
bond
physical
with,
ascription.
Yeah.
yeah, you're creating a
Yeah.
bond with what's on that paper, and
Sure,
it
sure.
kind of it sets your intention to move forward.
That's
with
why we did
it.
it in blood initially. It was
It's
significantly more
a
commitment.
little hard
Yeah,
to do virtually, I will say, and
yeah.
that struggle definitely is real. But yeah, I would ask for an attestation that they're going to show up.
I
So
definitely have a couple takeaways from that. Topper, what are your thoughts and advice? And also, Lang, you didn't answer. Do you have 8 hours for me throughout December to join
I
this
I
particular
have to check my
practitioner?
calendar.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll
Can,
send
can
you
you
the
not
invite.
answer that until you get the document that
Yeah, that
shows what the
seems fair.
commitment will
It
be?
seems fair. It seems fair.
From my perspective, I think you did the most important thing, and that is you gave the potential joiner of this group an idea of literally what you're trying to accomplish, right? Gave them a glimpse of what the end state will be, because if the takeaway, or if just the premise of this was, hey, I need people who are interested in CIS and have experience and want to help this, that's not much to go on.
Right.
Now, what you've done is given everyone, okay, I think this would be a valuable thing to create for the industry. I'm qualified to do it. Let me get involved in it. I see the path. I see where the light is at the end of this, and I think that's a good way to get engagement. Right? They'll see and agree or disagree and not join the group.
Yeah.
You'll get the people
Agreed.
who are genuinely interested in it.
Yeah. I think that the other takeaway from that too, and I didn't speak about this, is what is that end product, and what is that end product for them? For me, I love working groups because I genuinely want to give back, and I do enjoy the things they do from growing my own knowledge and all of that aspect of it, and arguing finer points. I love all of it as a practitioner. But I do also love my badges. That's why I played Xbox, y'all. Right? I wanted to collect my points. I'm not gonna lie. I'm that kid. I wanted to be the completionist for the games, right? But the point is, if you're doing the 8 hours, then I will want to make sure that we do some type of a kind of conversation of, hey, this is you getting CE credits and doing this, and we'll write up something to say, hey, you were part of this initial inaugural group. Long term, two things. What's the working product? The working product that I want to put out is an ongoing and updated list for vendors as their product features change, contract, and grow, that stays up to date so that people, as they need to use this, it's meaningful at that moment. Just as I've gone through this process for the vendors that leaned in, I've had to go back through it and go, oh, you added that feature, right? A great example was one of the EDR vendors added the ability to not allow any DLL libraries to load unless they were the known and signed libraries of certain version space. And it's just a checkbox, right? Out of certain areas, out of Windows and a couple of the locations there. Basically saying we're going to control and allow list DLL libraries running in the subset of the Windows directories and protected operating system space. They didn't have that before. And they added, what is that, 2.2, I think, or 2.3, I think it might be, 2.3 of DLL, Dynamic Link Library, allowing, specific allow list of libraries to execute in an environment. But the point is, it's how do you keep that up to date and meaningful? And one of the things that I love is that I have that funding. It's not hard to look up who I work for. I try to keep that separated from this space, but they've agreed to fund this. And what I really cared the most about it is because this is going to be ongoing, I wanted this to be something that the community controls. That's why I wanted to set up the working group. And initially, this is our first foray into it. But as we codify this and it becomes an index of sorts, I want this to be something where multiple people have a avenue to be involved and make changes as it needs to change when we come out with 9.0, when we decide to change to NIST or whatever it may be that changes as this index goes. A great example would be doing Trustmark, right? It's not that hard of a leap of logic to make this now be the index across to the remaining Trustmark safeguards that are not from CIS, right? That come from other places. Lang, you're intimately familiar with that aspect of it. But
Yep.
Yeah, anyways, Topper,
I was
good call out.
well, I was going to add something quickly, if you don't mind, which is
Yeah.
I think there is a benefit to providing those CPEs, especially to the folks where it's beneficial to their certification. So documentation you can create coming out of the working group that they can easily submit.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. That's a great call. And we've all got our CEs, which, by the way, if you're near the end of your CE cycle, Topper, it's time to make sure those are all in. I just did my renewal of a few of my certs, so I just got to play that game. And a lot of my working groups do go towards those CEs, even if they haven't sent me a cert. I will note up what we talked about, what we worked on, how many hours were codified in that project, and use that for my continuing education. So don't forget about that aspect of it too. But if you are on this and you're listening today, I know I just kind of did this as a pop-up, or if you're catching it later, I will have further opportunities to make this better, because the challenge today is, let's say I come up with a questionnaire and a vendor says yes to all these questions or no to these questions. There at some point needs to be a bare minimum standard of accepting that to be true. At some point, there'll have to be some way to say, okay, if you've said you do software listing and you can facilitate that, show me the screen where I'd go get the software that's installed on people's machines. Give me a screenshot. Give me a CSV format that comes out of that. Something to that effect that allows us to give what is the minimum standard as a working group to allow these to be vetted and validated, right? And ultimately, you can see where Lang, as you look at assessment's eyes, you could now say what evidence I'm willing to collect to actually show that this is in place could be part of that codification. So if now we're saying, for example, one of the vendors I worked with, which is in DMARC management, actually said to me, Matt, I want to be able to write this language, which is part of what they're doing in their process, that says, yeah, it says to implement DMARC. It doesn't say anything about getting to P equals reject. Well, that's kind of important, isn't it? And so they said, can I add in that we want you to get to P equals reject? This is the steps you'll take. Here's what we need you to do in our platform to make that happen. Da, da, da. Now you can actually get into additional assessment criterion from specific vendors as to what is successful implementation of those things. Like you start getting into a land there. So I have high aspirations for this. If to your point, Matt, we can take passion and turn it into action, which I've also been the recipient of in working groups where that doesn't happen. And I might suck at this, so we'll find out. But to be able to make this something that is very good for the industry and help solve a lot of the challenges that you see, for beyond this, for not beyond that as well, potentially, but for Write a Boom this year, I'm doing a pre-day with Sunil. And one of the things he had on his list of stuff he had never put together yet, but wanted to do, was breaking down modern breaches in the lens of the cyber defense matrix and the failures. And I took that a step further. Let's use the basis of CIS in these to say, hey, let's say I'm a password management company and I let my people use BYOD devices with a VPN on it that happen to have this like Plex software running. Maybe let's just this hypothetical scenario, right? And maybe that allowed them to cross all over my network and ransomware and gain access to source code throughout the entirety base and take password vaults, all these things. Where did they fall down? Well, they certainly fell down in 1.1. They certainly fell down in 4. They certainly fell down in 7. They certainly fell down in 10. They certainly fell down in 13 and in 12. They certainly fell down in 3. They certainly fell down and so we're going to break down these breaches in where are their predominant failures in the cyber defense matrix vis-a-vis the lens of CIS. And so It'll make some of those things easier and easier when you start getting into products and codifications and how you might solve things when you're looking at those, use cases. And all the way back to your point on white papers, when you're writing a white paper about security, how cool would it be if you could tie that into actual failed safeguards and controls, right? And now you're down to data, gaps of technology, people, process, or procedure. So anyways, I got off on a dang tangent as I wanted to do, but
No, it's not a tangent. Very focused.
it's a focused tangent.
Relevant
It's a tangent.
tangent.
Yeah, there you go.
Very
There you go.
focused.
Well, anyways, thanks y'all for hanging on so long. We've come to the end of the time as we do quite quickly. If you have any thoughts or comments, please comment on the video on LinkedIn and or YouTube. And I appreciate y'all being here. And thanks y'all for joining me on this tirade into what I can only imagine is only a few percentage of us, which leaves me to the last point, which is go get involved in a working group. Come join mine.
Yeah.
Get involved in general and expand your horizons, as well as, maybe you have a lot more expertise than others do and you can share it for sure. So thanks y'all. Appreciate it.